QuickBooks Enterprise 2021, Class Tracking Responsibility Accounting, Allocate Service Center Expenses to Revenue Centers, Method Number 2. Get ready, it's time to boldly account where no accountant has accounted before with QuickBooks Enterprise 2021.
And liftoff of...
Here we are in our Class Tracking Responsibility Accounting Practice file. We currently have the open windows open. You can open the open windows by going to the View dropdown, selecting the Open Windows list. Let's open up our Profit and Loss by class to see where we stand at this point in time by going to the Reports dropdown. We're going to go on down to the Company and Financial, take a look at that P&L, that Profit and Loss or Income Statement by class. We're then going to change the dates up top from 01/01/21 to 12/31/21. And this is what we have so far. We have those 4 departments that we broke out by class. The service departments here are not revenue centers, don't have any income related to them. So we want to be able to break them out as we can see here. And we'd also like to add them so we can level up and look at it from a different level, adding those items to where they ultimately are used for in terms of a higher standpoint. Which is revenue generation. So we want to allocate them to the profit centers here. So we did that with a journal entry down below. Let's take a look at another method that we can do this. So instead of having these items broken out down below, we want to line up these expenses as basically subclasses of the sales D1 and sales D2. So in other words, we're going to utilize the subclass feature. Let's take a look at the subclasses and how we set them up by going to the lists dropdown. We want to look at the class lists. So we set up these subclasses here. So what I'd like to do then is allocate these items to subclasses, and then they should show up as basically an expandable window on our profit and loss. In other words, if I go back to the P&L, I should have an expandable window for any subclass for this item and then this item. So that's going to be our adjustment now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these journal entries, and then we'll do the second allocation. So to remove these journal entries, I'm going to double click on the item here. There's the journal entry. I'm going to double click on it there. And then we'll just simply remove this one. So I'm going to say okay, and then I'm going to delete it. Delete it, please. Don't want it anymore. And we'll say okay. Are you sure? And we're like, yeah, I'm sure. And so we'll delete the journal entry. I'm going to close this out and close this out. And then the next one, I'm going to do the same for this one. I'm just going to delete that journal entry. So I'm going to double click on it. We're going to go into that journal entry. There it is, and let's go ahead and delete that one. So I'm just going to go delete it, don't want it, and then we'll close that out and close that out. So now we're back to the standpoint where we had before, where we have these 4 broken out, but we haven't allocated the service centers in any way to the revenue centers. So now we would like to apply these items out to subclasses. Now remember, it's a little bit more complicated than just to apply the whole amount out. In other words, I'm not just going to apply, say, Service Department 1 to Sales D1. We have to apply Service Department 1 to break out between the 2 revenue generation components, because we're imagining this being something like maintenance. So we got to break out between the 2. We used some type of activity base to do that. And you'll recall that when we did the last journal entry, those activity bases were either sales. So we looked at sales for Department 1 and Department 2 to break out a 45-55 breakout for the service department 1, and then in the second department we used employees to do that breakout 41 and 59. So we need to do that same kind of breakout over here. Now we could do it line by line. You could double click on each line and then break them out into each transaction here, and then adjust the transaction so it's now broken out to the subclasses in the proper location. But you can see that could get quite complex. So I wouldn't recommend going in that route, because there could be a lot of transactions. What I would do instead is our adjusting entry. So we're going to do our adjusting entry. I'm going to do it for Service Department 1, and basically just allocate these items out using our breakout, which in this case is going to be the 45-55 breakout, and then just allocate these items out to the proper sales and sales D1 and sales D2 using that 45-55 percentage breakout. So let's do a journal entry. I'm going to say, okay, journal entry. We're going to go to company. I'm going to hit the drop down. We're going to make a journal entry. I'm going to close this out. I'm going to say this is as of 12/31/21, 12/31/21. And the first one we had was payroll. So I'm going to say payroll, and I want to take the payroll, and I'm going to credit or remove the payroll, removing the payroll from the class for the service 1. So we're removing the payroll from service 1 here. So if I go back to the P&L, I'm picking up this item. We're gonna remove it with a credit, and then I'm gonna put that into our breakout between and I'm gonna call it payroll again, but now I'm breaking it out to another class. I'm gonna delete this just so I can get my classes correct, which is gonna be the sales D1, and I want to have the subcategory right now. So now I want the subcategory under sales D1, which is the service sub D1 account. And then this one, I'm gonna delete the name. We're gonna put that this is going to be payroll expense again, payroll expense, and this is going to be the subcategory, the second subcategory, which is going to be this item. So I don't want any amount there yet. And then I'm going to break it out between the 45 and, which we might be able to do a calculation right here. Can I do my calculator? I could say this is going to be equal to 1,000 times 0.45. So there we have that. And this is going to be then 1,000 times 0.55. And so there we have it. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and say save it and close it. And I'm going to say save and close. Let's go back to our profit and loss. And now we've got this. So in the expanded mode here, we have the sub item first, but here's the 450 in the payroll. And then we have the 600 that's applied to the sales. And then if I was to collapse this, if I want to collapse it, then you could see that line item is now collapsed down to the 6,450. So this is a nice way that we can see it, and then we could tie out that line item directly in. We can also use this method to apply different activity bases if we want to apply different activity bases to be allocating out things like the payroll, rent, and so on. In other words, when we use the first method, we can only use the one activity base to apply out using the sales or the employees for the whole department. Now, possibly we can use some other, multiple different activity bases for each line of the department if we wanted to get more granular and detail on that. So let's continue on with that. Now I'm just going to continue in with this, and so we're going to go to the second one, which is going to be the service D1. We're going to apply out the rent to the two sub accounts. So let's go back to the company dropdown. We're going to go to make journal entry, and I'm going to say okay. And so I'm going to do the same process here a little bit faster this time, hopefully. Rent. We're going to say rent. I'm going to credit the rent for the 1,000 that's in the rent for service department 1. We're going to take this out of the service department number 1. And then rent, once again, I'm going to not put the number yet. And I'm going to put this into the subcategory. The subcategory here. And then rent again. I'm not going to put the number in yet. To the subcategory, second subcategory. So same kind of process, and I'll go do the calculation. 1,000 times the 0.45, and this is going to be 1,000 times the 0.55, and then I'm going to save it, and I'm going to do another one. I'm going to keep on going down to supplies and then utilities, and then we'll check it out. Save and new. I'm going to say yes. And let's do the same thing for supplies. So I'm going to go down to supplies. So it was on the books for, the supplies was on the books for 100, I believe, for department number 1. Let's just double check it. Supplies was on the books over here for 100. So I was totally right. Didn't even need to check it. And then this is going to be service department 1, then supplies. And I'm going to delete this for now and say this is going to be to the subcategory, and then supplies, delete it for now. Once again, this going to the subcategory. Then I'll do the calculation here. It's going to be 100 times the 0.45, tab. And this is going to be 100 times the 0.55. And that looks good. So I'm going to do one more, which is utilities, save it and new it. And then we're going to say this is going to be for utilities. Let's check the amount there because I can't remember that one. That was also 100. I knew it was 100, but then I thought, I already had 100. So this is going to be the class service and then utilities. And I'll do the calculation this time as we go. 100 times 0.45. And then this is going to be service department, the first service department. Number 1, the subcategory, and then utilities again. That's going to be 55. It did the calculation for us, which is nice, and it did it correctly. So that looks good. So let's say save it and close it now, and then we'll check it out. Saving it, closing it, checking it out. So here we have it. So now we've got these items then broken out. Filtering by class, and then we want the class. I'm going to say multiple classes, and I'm going to pick up this one and this one. So we'll pick up those two, and then I'm going to say OK, and then OK. Now you can see this report is a little bit messy because it still has the 2 columns for the class and the subclass, and we're concentrating on the subclass, but it's only picking up the numbers for the subclass, which is what we want. So you could hit the little icon here or the little minus sign, and then we would have our 2 columns and then the total. This total then is basically the subclass total, so we can analyze the numbers in terms of the subclass here, which ties out to our numbers for the subclass. So that works pretty good. And so then I'm going to close this back out. Let's close this report, and then I'll open it back up again. Reports drop down, company and financial, and let's take a look at the profit and loss by class. I'm going to change the dates from 01/01/21 to 12/31/21. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the second department. That means the service department 2. Allocate that out. I want to adjust my headers though, the subclasses a little bit, so we can allocate this out. I'm going to do that by going to the lists drop down. We want to go to the class lists. I'm going to rename this second subclass to be D1 in some way and see if it allows me to have 2 that are named D1, but one's a subclass. I'm going to say OK. So now we've got these 2 items, and then I'm going to put 2 more subclasses that are for the D2. So I'm going to say, let's add a new class. And so I'm going to say new class, and this is going to be service D2 sub. And so then I'm going to make that a subclass then of the sales D1. And I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to do that again. I'm going to say this is going to be new. And I'm going to say this is service D2 sub. And this is going to be a subclass then of the D2. I'm going to say OK. So this is what the lineup looks like now. And so now I'm going to allocate the second 2 to these subclasses of D2. So if I go back to the profit and loss, we're now going to try allocating all these out, and we're going to do that with, once again, a journal entry, but this time allocating them out based on this ratio, the 41-59%, 41-59. So same process here. We're going to go to the company dropdown. We're going to go down to make journal entry, and so for the first one, it's going to be payroll. It's going to be a credit to remove it out of the first sub item. So it's going to come out of the service D2. It's going to go then payroll once again. We're going to be breaking this out 2,000 times this times 0.41. And then this is going to go into the first subcategory under the sales D1, but I'm going to say service D2 sub. And then this is going to be payroll. And that should be the difference. That looks good. So I'm going to say this is going to be to the second, under the second sales, and it's going to be service sub D2. So I'm going to continue on that. I'm going to say save and new. I'm going to do this for the rent now. I'm going to say save and new, do it for the rent. And so rent is going to be a credit we had in the second service department 1,000. So we're going to be removing that. So I'm going to take that out of the second service item, and then rent is going to be 1,000 times 0.41, and this is going to go into the sub account. So sub account under D1, so we're going to say that's the one, and then rent again is going to be in under the second one, the sub account D2. This should be the sub account D2. So it should be service D2 sub, right? All right. And so there we have it. And so I'm going to say save and new. and save it and new it. And then we're going to do this again for supplies. So I'm now going to say supplies is going to be a credit for what was in there, 300 that we're going to be taking out of the service department. So we're going to take it out of the service D2. Supplies, then supplies is going to be 300 times 0.41. And this is going to be in the sub account. So we got the sales, we got the sub D2, and then supplies for the difference is going to be in the second sales D2, sub D2 sub. All right, let's check that out. Let's say save it and close it. Save it and close it. All right, so this is what we have now. So now the D2 has been removed out here, except there's still $100 in utilities. We didn't do the utilities. We didn't do the utilities. I have to do the utilities. So I'm going to go to the company dropdown one more time, make another journal entry. As of 12/31, we're going to do this for utilities now. Utilities, and that's going to be a credit of 100. It's going to be removing it from the service D2. Then utilities is going to be 100 times 0.41. And that's going to be the sub of under the sales D1, service D2. And then this is going to be utilities for the difference, which is going to be under this one. And then service D2. Okay, I'm going to post that out. Save it, closing it, checking it out. Save, close, check out. So the report's getting kind of long, but we could scroll over here. We could say, okay, these two service items have now been allocated out. If I go all the way back to the right, we could see the allocation out for the first one. So we've got the service D1, the service D2. Here's the allocation line by line, which we can then tie out. So now we have then the sales department at the 6,000, and then the allocation not simply of the totals, which we had over here. The totals are still allocated out with service departments 1 and 2 allocated out. It's a little bit different because of the rounding that is involved, but like, for example, this 1,400 would be this number times 0.41 because this is rounded again. If I add some decimal, it's actually 41.2. So that's how we get to that 1394. But in essence, the allocation still happens here, the 1394. And then if I want to collapse it and see it all combined together, I can use my little collapse item. And then we have our total collapsed together, which would be kind of like these items being combined in now. So our total there is at the 7916, which is similar to if we go all the way down to this number that includes the revenue, the 79,900. So 7,900 and the 7,916, again, there's a rounding difference here. Then we've got the second one, same thing, where we're going to apply it out. So we got the two service items lined up with the allocation that's allocated to the sales line item. And then here's the ones that went directly into the sales line item. I can condense those down to get our total. So there's the 79, there's the 9584 there is going to be similar to the 9600. We have the rounding difference, and then the total is going to be that 17.5 that we have. And if we want to break out the activity that was allocated to those items, we could do so, and we get not just one number, but also, the allocation broken out, but for each line item. And then again, we can use a different cost basis if we want to allocate using something else in this method. Now, we can also do other kind of filtering options. So we might want to then, once again, put the service items together so that we can analyze just the service items. So we then could filter this report, and you might want to we can memorize the reports with certain filters in them so that we can be analyzing just the service departments and then possibly printing this one out. We could filter out, for example, the ones that have zero balances that were useful for us to create the report but aren't very good for the presentation. So for example, I can go to the customized reports up top and say we want to go to the filters, and we're going to filter by class, by the columns. And I'll say drop down multiple filters, and then possibly we want to see this one and this one for the new one that we put together, and say okay and okay. So now we've got the service department too. Now it still looks a little bit messy because it has the parent class and the subclass, but it only has the subclass numbers in it. So it's basically totaling up. It has a total column, which is kind of messy. But if you then collapse this, if you collapse this out, then you've got a nice little total up. There's our 2, the 1, the 3, and the 1. So that's what we can use then to measure out and the total comes down to the 3,400. So that 3,400 is this item that we can put together, and we can use that to analyze the service department, like the maintenance department or something like that. And then we can use it to allocate it out to the sales departments using that line-by-line allocation. If I go to the customized reports up top, go back to the filters, and let's say we go to the class filters again. I'm going to say now we want the class filters, and I would like to see then this one. I'd like to see multiple items. We want to see this one, this one, this one, this one, and then we don't need to see any of these because these 3 are 0 now. So they were useful for us, but now they're not because they're zeros. And then I could say okay, and then okay. So now we've cleaned it up. We don't have those 0 columns over here, and we've got this nice setup with the service, and the sales. Now I could probably name the headers a little bit nicer than this to line them up. And you might say, well, I kind of like this sales D1 first as the first one. I would kind of think that this would be the first one, and then the subs would be to the right of it. You might be able to number them to basically help out with that. So in other words, you might be able to go to lists drop down, and then I want to go to the class lists, and let's see what would happen if I put a number. I'd like this to be number 1 class 2, 3, or maybe 10, and then I have like account numbers on it. So if I was to adjust the class and say I want to edit this class, and let's say I want this to be like in the 10 series, and then I'm going to say okay, and then I'm going to double click on this one and say this one would then be let's say 12, right? It's going to be 12, and this one's going to be 12, let's say 14, and then this one I'm going to say is in the, let's say 40 series, and I'm going to say okay, and then this is going to be 42, let's say 42, and then this one, let's put a 44, and then okay, and let's see if that'll adjust where they're going to line up, right? So now it's still out of the order. So it looks like they line up the subclasses before the parent class. So, but we might be able to line them up with the subclasses. So if I reverse the order of these two, for example, if I want D2 to be the second one, let's try that. Go back to the classes. So it's going to, under the 10 series, let's say I want to reverse the order here and make this the number 14, and the other one, D1, number 12. So make this one number 12, and say okay, and then go back to my profit and loss. So now I can reverse the order of the subclasses if it's in alphabetical order by basically changing the numbers. Let's do the same for these two. So these two I might want to have D1 and then D2. So I can use numbers possibly to order the subclasses by making this one, let's say make this one 45, and then we'll make this one D1 the 44. That should work. And then I'll go back on over. So 44, and then 45, and then the total class. And then again, of course, you can collapse these out, and you've got that nice filtering option, so you can focus in on the level up, and then you can open them up and say, okay, this is what was allocated to those items, and then you could run reports that will basically be combining the subclasses, which are going to be departments then, and analyze them on a more granular level in that way as well.